Welcome to the Conjugate Nation podcast.
And we are back, episode 3. So episode 1, we talked about the conjugate system as a whole. Episode 2, we got into max effort. And now in episode 3, we'll start into the dynamic effort method. Before we get there, though, a couple of housekeeping pieces and things to note is, one, we do have a YouTube channel set up. So Conjugate Nation Podcast, you can find us on YouTube. We load the videos to there first because that's super simple and they go directly to there. You can also find us on Apple and Spotify. With those platforms, you're going to have to, there's a lag. So if you find us on YouTube and like, oh man, they're already up here, know that it's making its way to Spotify and Apple. But it does take time as the stream of that just is a little slower as they kind of have to like check, approve, do those things that I'm learning about. Past that, we don't have a specific social media for Conjugate Nation podcast, but all three of us do have our own Instagrams. I can be found at Jesse Bufano on Instagram. Chris?
At xfactor_Chris.
Shane.
It's at Conjugate Powerlifting, which is my CrossFit preferred course. And then I have Sweatshop Cincinnati, sweat with 2 T's. That's my personal page for my gym.
And I might be biased, but I would say that we're all worth following for our own individual reasons. Past that, this will probably be our last like big podcast in the sense of like this is the last big piece of the puzzle before we start branching out into maybe shorter and more specific things. Hard to say, though. I can't guarantee that moving forward. All three of us do enjoy talking a lot. I cannot guarantee it will get shorter in duration or lighter in content. But if you've made it this far, hopefully you're enjoying what we're putting out there. So with that, and without further ado, Chris is going to talk us through dynamic effort method and why we're using it for sport and CrossFit athletes.
Yeah, so as we discussed earlier, the conjugate's a system, and inside that system, they've got specific methods, and each one of those methods is designed for a very specific reason for the athlete, and you can tailor this system based on the individual needs of that athlete. So whether you're training a shot putter versus an endurance athlete versus a wide receiver, an offensive lineman, they all have different needs for their sport. The maximal effort is designed to do exactly that, have a max effort. That has a direct stimulus on the system. Specifically, we look at inter and intramuscular coordination, which is a very specific neuromuscular adaptation. But as you notice, the strength lifts get closer and closer to isometric. We've also got the force velocity curve. So as you start to move down in strength, you're moving up in speed. And that's another different adaptation. So in the speed strength and strength speed days, we're going to operate in those 70 to 80% ranges. And the reason is because we can now create more rate of force production, which is a completely different neuromuscular adaptation for the athlete. And I think we all agree there's a lot of specificity to sport that we can use inside that. And we use it just like the max effort. So we're going to use 2 days. We're going to have a dynamic effort lower, and we're going to have a dynamic effort upper, and we're going to repeat those weekly. And we can plug in specific movements that we find useful for that athlete.
Yeah, I think the idea for people that strength is broad in its scope. So there's more than just absolute strength, which is that 1 rep max. There's also strength, speed, strength. When you get into CrossFit, you get a lot of strength endurance pieces, and all of these can be developed to yield sort of a higher result across the board and spectrum, and can contribute to the other elements in their own unique way.
I think we should go over how we lay it out. Let's talk about how we lay out lower body. We'll go through lower body completely, and then we can attack upper body and how we do our speed work, because it looks a little bit different. Okay, so what I first want to start off is like reps and sets, okay? A traditional West Side template is 12 sets of 2. Week 1, week 2, week 3 would be 10 sets of 2, okay?
And that's for
this squat. Is a squat for squat. You can use it for a front squat, back squat, to a box, no box, any kind of specialty bar you can think of, high bar, low bar, wide stance, narrow stance, Anderson
bands or chain,
bands or chains, or straight weight. Okay, any variation that you can think of. Okay, so that's a traditional West Side sets and reps. Okay, so it's pretty important, the reason why we use the number of reps. What we want to do is we want the amount of time it takes to be identical or slightly longer than our competition lift. So when you look at 12 sets of 2, if we're roughly at 0.8 meters per second, it's 1 second down, 1 second up. That gives us 4 seconds of movement with 2 reps. Okay? And this will translate to a true 1 rep max in a competition. If it is less than that, it won't directly translate over because we're not producing force long enough to translate into our competitive lift. Okay? So 12 sets of 2 has been the staple at Westside for a long time. Now, there's a couple other rep schemes that we use. One is 5x5. Traditionally, what we would do is after a competition, if we want to put more muscle mass on and to give us a little bit of change, a little bit of break, we'll do 5 sets of 5. This traditionally will help us put a little more muscle mass on, and this is something we'll do in the off season, for a little while if we need to gain muscle mass. Then there's if you have elite lifters. Elite lifters, to me, I've had obviously quite a few world record holders in the squat. And for them to get more efficient at moving that weight, they tend to move it a little faster through range of motion than intermediate lifters. So for those athletes, I usually put them at 9x3. Okay. Now they're still in the 0.8 meters to 1 meter per second. Okay. Now 12x2 is 24, 5x5 is 25, 9x3 is 27. Mm-hmm. My elite, ultra elite athletes, my pro level lifters will be at 9x3. So they're doing just a little bit more volume. But really what's happening is they get really good at grinding weight for a long time. Okay. So, they get good at strength speed, which is moving heavy weight slow. So the fact they can grind a little longer means that they have the weight on their back for a longer period of time in a max. And then the 9x3 gives them additional time on that. Okay, so that's why I switched to 9x3 for our pro level lifters. All right, because remember, the time that you're straining for a max lift has to correlate to your speed work.
I think the other thing too is that so for this, like 12x2, we're generally working on the minute, but sometimes you'll see that pull down to like even quicker turnarounds of like on the 45 seconds. I know that with sport athletes, like sometimes it's been referenced as like, hey, like take the time, like if you're going to play football, like how long are you getting between your plays? And then how long is the action that you're participating in that play for? And that can be actually quite similar. So in that opportunity there is like, 12 sets of 1 is, a very short work period with about the same rest period as you might get on the field. I always like 12x2 actually for as a general and a place to start. And the main reason being is I think one of the greatest things overlooked for squatting past the mechanics of the movement itself is actually the walkout and setup. Mm-hmm. And that's something that gets, even if you're in a monolift, there's still that like how you set up for that bar and that first rep, it really does count. And you can make big changes to your squat just by perfecting that initial lift. And I think one thing that can get missed is like, 5x5, I like it as well. Like, around a competition time is a different stimulus. But I like the 12x1 because like the difference is like 5x5, you got 25 reps, 12x2, you've got 24 reps. Minor difference, not really worthy of note, but 12x2, you get 12 setups every single week. And 5x5, you're only getting 5 of those. And that can be a big difference for building the skill of like getting to the start of that lift.
I've never been a massive fan of 5x5. I very rarely use it. But anytime you can introduce a different change, a different stimulus sometimes at the correct time is always a good thing. So it's like, to me, 12x2 is like a screwdriver. In a toolbox, it's used often. 9x3 in my gym, like having a hammer. It's used often. That 5x5 is like having a Sawzall. Fun to use once in a while. Don't have to use it often, okay? Yeah. But it's worth noting and why we use it and why we have it to have a full understanding of what we do in speed work. And you're right. 12x2 gives you more opportunities to work on technique, setup, and 12x2 is the bread and butter of the Westside system. That is what's going to be used majority of the time. Like I said, my pro level lifters be at 9x3. Yeah. But it takes a long time to get to a pro level, right? Yeah. And so 12x2 is where most of them are going to live at. Yeah. And it has to do with,
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it just has to do with how long you can grind for in a squat, and it has to do with what you need to work on. Most people need to work on their pick and their technique more than anything else. Like maybe when you're at a pro level, you probably have good technique at that level, by that time. So now it's the physical attributes that become more important than the technique. Not that it's more important, but that's what you're going to need to spend time on. If your technique is perfect, the only thing you can do at that point is work on the physical attributes required to break a world record or be number one in the world. That's all I think left at that point.
I think the other side too is just a different stimulus for different lifters as well. Like not only like in and around competitions, but like, just seeing how each lifter responds, what kind of or type of lifter they are. Like if they're that speed lifter already, or they're already the slow grinder, is that making that choice that builds their weakness can be done sort of inside of that sets and reps selection.
Correct. And someone who does 12 by 2 might have perfect technique the whole time. You take them to 5 by 5, you might see a breakdown. And if 5 by 5 is what was needed to see what muscle groups broke down, that's great, because that's how we choose our special exercises. So that's, they all have a valid point. They're all different. You just need to understand what tools needed on that day. And that's it.
Yeah. The other side too is when you're talking about, so you talked about doing it as a 3-week wave, is so understanding that if you did a 3-week wave of week 1, 12 sets of 2, week 2, 12 sets of 2, week 3, 10 sets of 2, that if you're like, hey, I'd like to see what 3-week wave of 5 by 5 looks like, you could just as easily work the next wave as that and just sort of see like, I just don't like that as much, or it's not as good, or man, it worked really well for this one lifter. And we might keep them on that plan, but keep the rest of the group generally at 12 by 2. We've done 9 by 3 as well. And have used it just, again, like you said, as a stimulus change. Like when you've got years and years of 12 by 2, sometimes it's worth just a stimulus change to see the effect it has. So same reason we switch bars, right?
100%. So, what you have is an increase of intensity for 3 weeks, okay? And you have an increase in volume for the first 2 weeks, and the third week it'll drop a little bit. So, what we do when we pick, one, we can use straight weight. That's how this whole system started. It started with weightlifters, and weightlifters were using between 70 and 85%. So 70, 75, 80, or, they tried all the way up to 85. I will tell you, unless you're like Olympic caliber chance of medaling at the Olympics, don't even think about 85%. So 70, 75, 80% straight weight is where we will squat, deadlift at for speed work. If you're new to speed work, what I would tell you is the majority of people should do 65, 70, 75%. Most will not move the weight fast enough. After a few, maybe 3 or 4 3-week waves, depending on how fast the individual is or age, things like that. If they pick up the speed required, then we can look at adding that 5% in and going to 70, 75, 80%. But the speed of the bar, correct. The speed of the bar is the most important thing. Okay, so we're trying to move the bar between 0.8 meters and 1 meter per second. If it moves slower than that, we're not training the actual quality that we're trying to train. So you're not going to actually improve, okay, in your speed strength, which is a problem for an athlete. The other thing too is you're not going to recover fast enough from your training. So you might think, oh, my training protocol is not good because I'm not recovering. My main lifts aren't going up. Well, no, they wouldn't go up because you just changed your volume and you changed basically your whole system kind of in a sense. We have our system laid out so we can fully recover from it, okay? And our nervous system recovers. That's why it's a 3-week pendulum wave. For all those individuals out there, and Jesse and Chris, you guys will, I'm sure, have a story or something about this and understand this too. Like I always talk about, like in high school, my bench or squat went up 5 pounds every week for 5, 6, 7 weeks, and then it dropped 25, 30 pounds in a week. But my bench didn't get 25, 30 pounds weaker in 1 week. Basically what had happened is once I got past 3 weeks, my nervous system started to degrade. And once it finally caught up, it was my nervous system degrading that caused me to bench less weight. And it's a protection mechanism for your central nervous system. It's like, hey, you have no clue what you're doing, so we're going to protect you from yourself. Okay. And this is why we do a 3-week wave. Unlike other groups out there, they get their volume in underneath their max days, like 5 by 5 heavy is an example, right? We don't. We get our high volume day is underneath a sub-maximal load, a load that's not heavy enough to break down our position and mess with our technique. And it is so we can work and perfect technique on our speed day, but it's not a heavy day, so it's not stressful on our body. We get our high volume day on a day that's very easy on our body. This allows our nervous system to recover. But like everything else in the world, like Your cells replenish in waves, light is in waves, sound is in waves. Your nervous system goes in waves. So what we do is we ride that wave. We do the same type of squat for 3 weeks, okay? So if you use a specialty bar or it's a front squat or back squat, whatever it is, you do the same squat for 3 weeks, increase percentage intensity, 5% for 3 weeks. On the 4th week, you'll change the movement. You can make one simple change. If you were doing a box squat straight weight with a safety squat bar, simply switching to a straight bar is enough stimulus. You can do a lot of change. You could have a safety squat bar, front squat, reverse bands, okay? You just have to change something so your nervous system doesn't degrade. You'll start back over at the 70%, 70, 75, 80%, intensity increases again, okay? This is to keep your nervous system in check. This allows us on our max days to actually max every week. And this is where we gain advantage over our competition. Like the Bulgarian said, the person who lifts the heaviest weight the most frequently gets the strongest. Well, we're the only system in the world that can max out every week. And we can do this because of our dynamic effort setup.
Yeah, less systemic cost as the weeks go on. It always is very surprising. People are so skeptical of the capacity to recover from maxing twice a week every week. But some of that is the stimulus change. And then some of that is coupling it with days that are very different. Working different strengths on different days allows the athlete to work very hard on those primary days every week. So 2 dynamic effort days each week, 2 max effort days each week, and really pushing effort. Like the stimulus from the dynamic day is very, very different than the stimulus on the max day. I find dynamic effort lower definitely the hardest day of the week. And I think that's pretty across the board. Having to be Friday and the end of the week is also just a nice way to round of the week. Friday night, delicious cheat dinner just doesn't feel the same when you didn't get the training in before that.
So Jesse, one thing you said is you're talking about rest periods, right? So typically for power lifters, we do a 30-second. That means the bar is out of the hooks and it's way back down in 30 seconds. Everybody's on a 1 minute, like a 1 minute EMOM, like every minute on the minute, right? Well, think of 30 seconds. Think of 80% of your max every 30 seconds. Think of a 1,200-pound squatter every 30 seconds, moving 900 pounds. Okay?
Yeah.
And think of the conditioning it takes for a power lifter to do that. So power lifters, we use this as a conditioning tool as well. So it'll be 30-second rest periods. But if you're working with athletes in other sports, what I would suggest is you can do 30 seconds for sure on some phases. But what I would start with is a rest period that maybe is a little closer to what would happen in sport. And then as they are moving the weight at the speeds you want, you can slowly lower that rest period. So if we take football, for example, Chris, what's the average length of a football play?
7 seconds.
7 seconds. So, when you're looking at, 9 by 3, that's, 3 reps, right? That means you do 9 plays, 6 seconds total worth of work, right? So your plays are average 7 seconds or whatever. Someone who's actually in motion working is probably right around 4 to 6 seconds of really intense work. And that's 12 by 2 is 4. 3 reps is 6 seconds. So if I'm working with a football player, I can do, 2 reps or 3 reps depending on their position. And say 12 sets 2 example. If you're doing 30-second rest periods, you're doing a play every 30 seconds, period. In football is a speed strength sport. So the great thing is I have them train their sport. It's pretty simple. I get a high school kid who can do 200 pounds on his 70%. Well, if I get him to 300 pounds and that's his 70%, and he's moving at the same rate of speed, he's now a third better, faster, and more output at the speed that he needs for his sport. Okay? So it makes it pretty simple. But, we've done this where we've done 12 sets of 2 for squats and 12 sets of 2 for deadlifts. And, get this done in roughly 12 minutes. That's 24 plays in football. How many athletes are doing more than 24 plays in a game? And you're doing a play every 30 seconds. You get a pro-level athlete and get them to move 100 pounds more on a squat, like an NFL player, get them to move 100 pounds more on a squat for 24 plays in 12 minutes. You're kind of on to something.
I think that's a big thing with the max effort, too, is that if you want to raise your speed strength, you need to raise your maximal strength. And I think traditionally, we've seen strength and conditioning coaches use the Olympic lifts because the Olympic lifting is a speed, speed sport. So you want to train inside those velocities, which does have good transference. So you get down to, University of Oregon. I was down there for the World Championship decathlete or World Championships like maybe 5-6 years ago. Bill Pappas and Tom Pappas was a world champion decathlete on a CrossFit down there, and they had a bunch of these guys in there, and they're all doing alternating split jerks, power snatches, power cleans, and because of those sports, especially your jumpers, your throwers, your sprinters, it's high rate of force production, and you need to be able to train the nervous system to be that way, which you do through percentages. And then even like we haven't touched base, moving into away from the 70 to 85%, but even down further, down to like the 30 to 40%, you start looking at explosive strength, and now you're starting to talk about higher rates of force production or rate of force development.
Yeah, so if you're doing explosive power, you're looking at 30 to 40% bar weight, like you mentioned, and you're at 1.2 to 1.4 meters per second. So what you have is 24 to 36 reps is optimal. When you're looking up maximals, 48. So actually how I would lay that out is up to 48 reps on the first week and second week, and then I would go 36 reps on week 3 for an elite level athlete.
For jumping?
This would actually, it could be jumping, yes.
Okay.
But it's also bar weight. You can put bar weight, squat, deadlift, Olympic lifts, 30 to 40% of a max weight. And if it moves between 1.2 to 1.4 meters per second, it's explosive power. You're working just like you're working plyometrics, but you look at all the movements you have available. You have plyometrics available. You have any kind of front squat variation, front squat jumps, banded, chain weight, straight weight, reverse bands, any kind of bar, like a safety squat bar, front squat that changes your position the way the load is, which would transfer really well to someone picking up a sandbag because the weight's way out in front of them. And we've seen like in the games, a lot of people had a problem picking up sandbags, knowing how to carry it correctly. And like Jesse said before, people who do the conjugate system touch things in so many different angles and so many different types of resistance that they adapt very quickly. So even not just doing the speed work, doing explosive power with bars and weight and bands and chains, not just plyometric jumps, is also another way to get through quick. How many times do we see in CrossFit, it's like, oh, hey, here's a 150-pound deadlift for guys for a lot of reps. Well, if you've never moved a light weight like that fast before, you're not going to be ultra efficient at it. But if you're training that type of stuff all the time, you're going to learn how to move through that really quickly and very efficiently and effectively.
I think that's a huge pitfall with people that are training for competition wise now, especially, is that they get wrapped up into all these weights that they want to do the weight over what's in the best interest of their adaptation that they need to become better. Is they would rather slog through heavy weights and move slow, and they're just continuing. It's like the marathon runners that always run the same distance. They just increase their distance but run the same rate. It's like, well, I can't beat my times. It's like, well, you don't get faster by running the same speeds. You get faster by running faster.
I think that's the biggest mistake actually with dynamic effort days. I've seen it in our gym for sure, and I've seen it. I've seen people drift off course so that when they're like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" and send a video, and it's like I would say, so we talked about those percentages for a straight weight, so no accommodating resistance on that bar. I would say that past the idea of those, or past getting so hung up on those exact percentages, is like, are you moving violently? So if you're not moving violently with the bar, I would have a tendency to adjust those until you are, and then go up 5% for week 2 and 5% for week 3. Because the worst case scenario, and we actually got the velocity meter, that rep 1 velocity meter in the gym, just because I wanted to show it like digitally in real time, because just having these conversations with athletes being, oh, I feel like I'm going really fast. And I was like, hey, it's just not true. And then we got the velocity meter. People were like, oh man, we're like, 0.5, 0.6 meters a second. And yeah, we're looking for 0.8 to 0.1. Some people had to cut 20% off that weight to get there. But the problem is you keep to these percentages, but move slow and miss the velocity that you're supposed to be working at, or have too much weight to be developing force well, and too little weight to be developing, absolute strength well. So you're just in this waste of time middle ground where, I guess maybe potentially you're putting in reps, so you could be getting technically better, but otherwise as a stimulus, you're kind of wasting that opportunity. So it's really important to understand that, with however you like, whatever lift you're applying it to, squat, bench, or dead, is that you really need to make sure, like, are you putting maximal effort into moving from the bottom of that lift to the top of that lift every time? And is that actually fast?
Speed work is your max work. So when you're doing speed work, if you want your max to raise, you have to attack the speed as hard as you can. Jesse brought up a good point about different devices that measure bar speed. We used Tendo units, I've used form collars, everything kind of has its pros and cons. But I would recommend that you get one. And I'm telling you, every strength coach needs to get one. 99.99% of coaches who think they know what speed strength is do not know what it looks like. Okay. Like Jesse was saying, a lot of people, the numbers that we give you are what we kind of averaged at Westside Barbell percentage wise. We had really good lifters who were very strong, very well rounded, who spent a lot of time in this. So most lifters will start well below this, like Jesse said. Jesse, like when you came out to my gym for the first time and you went to Westside Barbell and you've seen some of the speeds of some of my lifters, right? What did you think the first time you saw like lifters at Westside, lifters at my gym when they move a bar?
Oh man, you can't even it's not even something you feel like you can replicate. It's so violent and so explosive on every rep. You're like, man, and that's a piece too, is also recognizing that some of it is training the tissue to be able to produce that result. Because initially you're gonna the point is to move super well, try as hard as you can, but also understand it's gonna take time for that tissue to adapt to being able to produce that violent force. Because the first time you see it, you're like, well, that's not me at all.
Yeah, everybody always thinks it's like a genetic thing, like, oh, well, it's nice, they're an athlete.
Yeah.
No. They train a system long enough to acquire an attribute that did not exist before. It is the combination of speed work and AR, accommodating resistance, that will give you the ability to move that way. And the reason why I said most coaches will never know what that 0.8 meters to 1 meter per second will look like unless they get something to measure that speed is because most coaches have actually never witnessed someone move at that speed before.
Yeah.
I never did until I went to Westside Barbell. Okay? My athletes, until I went to Westside Barbell, never moved like that until I went to Westside Barbell and I learned how to train people like that. And then now all my athletes who've been with me long enough all move like that. And, I always said, like, to, Jesse and other people, like, I know when I go to a competition who trains Westside method
100%.
correctly.
Yeah.
Because I can see it in their movement quality. And it's a rare few select people, but I see it.
Yeah.
And they can't hide. So I already know what they do, and it's a game changer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say one of my biggest mistakes with dynamic effort is I was fast on the way up, but I was controlled on the negative. And then, the more you study and you, especially with the accommodating resistance, you get those overspeed eccentrics, which essentially means that the band's pushing you faster to the floor. So you're descending a squat, the band's going to pull you down quicker, which requires those, tendons and ligaments to have that elasticity to change direction. So quick amortization phases between eccentric to concentrics, that violence that you're talking about. And for sport, I mean, that's really when you talk about, changing in direction, you're talking about springing, bounding, jumping. I mean, there's a reason why the depth jump has, value, right? Is you're creating that same kind of effect, that overspeed, especially when you hit the ground and bam, you're up off the ground real quick. It's the same idea that you're doing that dynamic effort. So fast down, fast up.
Yeah.
Correct. When you look at
Go ahead, Shane.
Oh, sorry. When you look at depth jump, right? So in Russia, when they were setting up depth jumps, they could tell you, depending on what sport, how high your box should be. Because the amortization phase for a high jumper is different than the amortization phase of an Olympic lifter. When you do a depth jump off of a higher box, you have a longer amortization phase. It takes longer to reverse it. When you go off a shorter box, it's faster. So you can literally take the height box and get the amortization phase you need for a set sport, whatever that sport is, which is a neat thing. But the reason why we use accommodating resistance is the accommodating resistance offsets the human strength curve. So overspeed eccentrics, right? You produce a greater reversal of muscle activation with band tension than you do straight weight. The greater the band tension, the greater the reversal muscle activation is. Okay? And so you cannot even build the same type of reversal speed and speed that we build without the use of accommodating resistance. It's impossible. Or if you do depth jumps or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's important to note too. So we talked about the percentages we use for straight weight, but man, I have to be real honest with just being like, if you're going to stick to dynamic effort method and you're just using straight weight, you're just not going to see the same results as if you can apply bands to that. And bands actually, if you can get them set up well, and we'll get a video up on the YouTube channel for different options for setting them up in R3 versus R4 versus monolift, and for the different lifts, we'll post some content on that online. But I think the piece is like, without that band piece, the results are just not going to be as good. So with Justin Medeiros, like we're coming up on 2 years now of my work with him on special strengths. We have only used bands to this point. So we actually don't have chains, and that's on the list for this winter. Is he's now getting the point where like, hey, we need another stimulus change, and we'll get him a full set of chains to be able to use for just a change. But for the last 22 months of us working together, we have been able to kill just off of having the ability to set up bands on squat, bench, and dead as our accommodating resistance. Which, if you can get the setup, you're talking about a couple of bucks from Rogue or Westside, wherever you want to get your bands from. But it doesn't take much to add them, and it really, really changes the game. Like, the dynamic effort without bands is just not really that same thing.
No, it's not. And I do recommend that people either go to Rogue or Westside for their bands. They last longer, and they're evenly set up, and they have a higher band tension than other companies that I've tried and used. Yep. They're both great companies, to use. But you're 100% right. You could never have the movement quality without accommodating resistance that you will with it. When you take your level 1, CrossFit talks about if you want to build athleticism with somebody, you have to increase their quarter extremity acceleration, right? But physics has proved it's impossible to optimize it without the use of accommodating resistance because of the human strength curve. As your leverage increases, your body starts producing less force as it goes through range of motion, okay? So as your velocity increases, because your leverage increases, your force production actually drops, okay? So by having the band to kind of slow the bar down as your leverage increases, it keeps our force production the same, very close to the same all the way through range of motion, which means that when we take that accommodating resistance off, you'll jump higher, throw faster, because you'll accelerate, your limbs will accelerate for a longer period of time before deceleration.
Yeah, they're more, and that's, I think what Shane's saying there too, to hopefully try to make it super clear, is that what he's saying is, as your joint angles improve. So at the bottom of the bench, at the bottom of the squat, you're in the most mechanically disadvantaged position. And the further you get away from that position, the more the mechanical advantage improves, right? That's why if you have someone who quarter squats, that quarter squat is going to be significantly higher than a full depth squat. So what he's saying is, as those joint angles and leverages improve, the bands account for that and the chains account for that. So at the bottom of the squat, let's say if you've got, number 3 bands on there, at the bottom of the squat, you've probably got like 50 or 60 pounds of band tension. And at the lockout, you're looking about 95 pounds of band. So from the bottom of that squat to the top of the squat, you've added somewhere around 35, 45 pounds of tension. So the bar actually gets heavier as you move through the range of motion from the bottom to the top. And that's where we're looking to train the body to, instead of start to back down and ease off the throttle, that we keep that throttle open all the way. And when you see a conjugate athlete compete at a powerlifting meet, because that athlete will stand that bar up and the plates rattle, because they're used to producing full, like top speed and full force effort all the way to the end, and their bodies adapt to that stimulus. I think that's even where, I don't want to speak too much to it because I don't feel like I have, that Golgi tendon response, where it's like we're able to train the body to know that it's okay to accelerate maximally all the way to that end range of motion. And that does take time, and it does take accommodating resistance.
Remember, power is measured in time. It's not measured in weight. So as motion velocity decreases, external resistance increases, okay? So for us, you need to move that bar as fast as possible because you need it on your back or in your hands for the least amount of time possible. The heavier it goes, the less time you have to strain with that weight. And this is where it becomes very important. So like we were talking about straight weight speed, we also, with accommodating resistance, what we're looking at in the squat is week 1 is 50%, week 2 is 55%, week 3 is 60%. Week 4, you go back down to 50%. Now the accommodating resistance stays the same at 25% all the way through. The reason why that doesn't change is because we're offsetting your leverage improvement or the human strength curve, which is not going to change in your structure. So therefore, the band, chain, reverse band accommodation percentages stay the same, okay? Now, we've used 25% for years. There's a time period where I noticed that, like I said, my athletes got really good accelerating through the top. And so I took them to 30%. When I did, we noticed that our deadlifts and our squats went up. I was at a meet, and Louis Simmons from Westside Barbells, like, he noticed the difference in our deadlifts and the difference in our squats, and he asked what I had changed, and I told him that's why I changed. He goes, I was thinking about doing the same thing. So he experimented. I know he went up to 33%, and he had really good success up to 33%. For anybody listening to this, don't do the 30% or 33%. If you're like getting to the point where you're looking at hunting down a world record and you got to try something different, and you're a violently fast lifter, then you can look at that. But I'd tell you that's only
so just to be clear, like what that looks like. So if you have a 400-pound back squat, or let's say box squat, you are going to put 100 pounds of band tension. So it'd be 50 pounds on each side. So you'd have 50 pounds of band tension on each side. For week 1, you would have 50% bar weight. So 50% of 400 would be 200. And then the 25%. So you'd have a total of 300 pounds at the top. At the bottom, obviously, it's going to be lighter. But that would be your setup. And the cool thing, like once you set up your bands, they're the same for all 3 weeks, right? All you're doing is adding 5% bar weight each week. So, in the beginning, I know that's a little bit of a, obstacle for some people because it does take some learning. There is a little bit of a learning curve to learn how to set up the bands. And obviously, like you said, Jesse, we'll get some info out there to show you guys how to do this.
But including
you're going to notice people hitting walls.
Like, I think that's the other thing too, is I'll make sure we post a video of how to check band tension, because you can actually do it for the individual. It surprisingly, it doesn't vary by as much as you might think, but the band tension, you can actually go ahead and get a scale out, do it super simple. Like we'll get some video of that, and then you can kind of set it, because there will be a difference if you got a fella who's like 5'6" and a fella who's 6'8".
Right.
That is different bands, but it is the band tension at the top that percentage is based on. So just like Chris is saying, if you've got a 400-pound squatter, what you need is 100 pounds of band tension total, which should be, for most people, is actually going to be number 3 bands, and being able to apply that to the bar, and that stays the same. Once you know that, you kind of know it, and you can keep it pretty simple that way. Where even if you switch out bars, you might just keep that bands, like if you're like it's going to be close enough for, because even the bands, like as they age, will vary a little bit. Like there is wiggle room. Like it doesn't have to be so crazy and so strict on like these minor pieces. The only thing I actually would say to that is it is 100% worth. And we did those with Justin, as I had him order all new bands from Rogue, and then he taped them and they're marked. So the number 3s are the number 3s that only get used for barbells, and they're always used the exact same. So it's not going to feel different, like side to side. Same thing with the 1s, 2s, and 4s, is that they're all marked, so they get used on the same bar, and they always have the exact same number of uses. I know, Shane, you guys just tie them together and put them on the wall, but that same piece, like, you don't want to feel like the bands are off and it's pulling the bar funny.
No.
Yeah, they're not used for mobility and hip circles and all that other stuff. Like it's used just for the dynamic effort until they get old. Then you just replace them, and now you can use them for stretching.
So that's what all our bands, when they're done being used on the barbells, go to the CrossFit side to be used individually.
There
you go. Nice. So when we're looking at this for like 12 sets of 2, or I'm going to use that as an example here in a minute. If you don't know what speed you're moving the bar, you don't know what sport you're training for. Okay, you better know what speed you're moving the bar for a translation. And if you look at 0.8 meters to 1 meter per second, that doesn't sound like a big variation. Technically, that's 20%. That's a massive variation in speed from 0.8 to 1 meter per second, if you're looking at that variation. So there is wiggle room, like Jesse said, but it has to fit within inside that, okay? So, when we're looking at it, if you don't know what speed you're moving the bar at, you also don't necessarily know what your volume is. If you talk to a bodybuilder, it's like, oh, okay, I did 10 reps with 100 pounds on bench. That's 1,000 pounds of volume. Well, okay, if I do it as fast as I can, I do 10 reps in 20 seconds. If I tell Jesse I want a 5-second eccentric phase, 5-minute eccentric phase, 5-minute concentric phase, he's going to do 10 minutes per rep. Does that mean me and Jesse have the same volume? No. Okay. What's nice about our system is that our volume is extremely accurate because we're using a percentage of our max, and we're not going to have a huge variation in that speed there. So we get our volume very efficient. So when you look at 12 sets of 2, if you're a 450-pound squatter, that's 5,400 pounds of volume. Every time you increase 50 pounds of bar weight, you increase 600 pounds of volume. So if you go to 500-pound squat, that's now 6,000 pounds of volume, okay, at the same rate of speed. So, I talk to people often, and I'm like, hey, when do you increase your volume? Or when do you know when to increase your volume in your system? Oh, like when my numbers are going really good, I'm going up, and I feel great. Like, that's usually when I increase volume. I'm like, or maybe you feel really good because you're finally at optimal volume. Maybe adding weight will actually take you backwards. Okay. But what it sounds like to me is you're guessing.
Yeah.
We don't guess, At 50%, if I get 10 pounds stronger in a squat, the bar weight goes up 5 pounds. Pretty simple. If I get weaker, if I get injured, or if I'm not sleeping correctly or well, or have stress or anything, like, your max is your max. Don't sit there and your max drops 20 pounds because you've been, haven't been doing your job, and then you want to keep the same weight for speed. No. Every week we test. And if we have a tester, if that number goes up, your bar weight goes up. If that number goes down, your bar weight goes down on your speed work. It directly correlates to what you're actually capable of doing that day. That's why when people say to me, like, I've heard Westside Systems just for people who use performance enhancing stuff. That's all only going to work for, or only people in gear. It doesn't matter if you're 90. It doesn't matter if you're 10 years old. It doesn't matter what you do for your nutrition or for your sleep. What you can do is what you can do. Whether you're a 200-pound squatter, a 1,200-pound squatter, it doesn't matter. Your volume directly translates to your capabilities.
I think for us, the way that we express that both in our classes and also for the individual athletes is it's very common for us to max a bar out on Monday. So if we know we're going into a new wave on Friday of speed squats, then the Monday we'll be like, okay, whatever you choose today, that's going to be your new bar for this next wave. So if on Friday we're going to, whatever we choose. So if the athlete goes, okay, we're going to max out safety squat, then okay, that's the percentage we're going to use then to calculate the percentages for Friday and the next 3 Fridays. So they choose what the bar it is. So as individuals, you can select, right? Because, some athletes are going to want to develop that sort of like, thoracic upper back piece. Safety squats always just, I love that bar as the best place to start. If you've never used a specialty bar, safety squat is a go-to because it's high value for, so many things. But if they max that out, or, mega bow that, Rogue's got that new Buffalo, 16-inch camber is awesome. Any of those sort of like bars, whatever they max out, then the percentage we use for the following 3 Fridays are based off that current max, because it's indicative of where the athlete currently is at. And we never, ever work off that max at like, in my dreams, I'm going to get to, this is the squat I want. You're like, we don't load those dynamic efforts for the squat that we dream about. We load it for the squat we currently have and allow, that to develop that force work. And if you want that sort of bigger squat, you allow that to accumulate on the Mondays.
That's a good way to start for beginners too. If you're new to this program, test your 1 rep max, your max effort on Monday, and then start your 3-week wave on Friday for the dynamic effort. And then if you've got a new wave coming up after that one on the Monday before, or in the 3 weeks while you're going on through your dynamic, set a new record in a lift. Like, that's going to be our next 3-week wave. Like, use those current records, especially beginners, because you're not going to know a lot of that stuff, especially if you start using like 4-inch blocks, 2-inch blocks, deficits, like all these, different things that most, especially CrossFit coaches, aren't used to. Just get some records on the board and start working off those.
Yeah.
With accommodating resistance, you'll hear us talk about a lot of times that bands work best for speed, that we get more speed out of that than anything else. And we have a great transfer over with bands. So some people are like, why don't you use bands all the time? Then why would you even use chains, or why would you use straight weight? What I'll tell you, if you have accommodating resistance available to you, we very rarely do straight weight, but we will do it, especially for Olympic lifters or CrossFitters who have to have their timing down for the Olympic lifts. That's really important for us. But we do all of them, even for power lifters who don't need to have their timing necessarily down. Like, accommodating resistance and chain won't really affect their timing. We still do it. Louis told me a long time ago, he's like, if you want to get faster, move the same weight at different speeds. Now, he didn't mean, you take like 135 on bench and you go really slow. You go a little faster. You go really fast. No, it was, we're moving between 0.8 meters and 1 meter per second. We are using compensatory acceleration training, which is something Dr. Hatfield made popular in the United States. And what that means is you accelerate all the way through range of motion as fast as possible. If you think you do that, if you haven't actually trained that in speed work, you don't do that. When you learn to accelerate all the way through range of motion, like even the last inch, you're still trying to gain as much velocity as you can. This is how we actually do our dynamic work, and it's extremely important for us to do that. Okay, so no matter whether you're using straight weight, chain, reverse band, or band to the bottom, we're using the compensatory acceleration training. Okay, and where it's important is you'll notice bands come on really hard at the top. It's a little less through the bottom and middle. Okay, chain weight we comes up. That's like an abrupt load. It abruptly loads back onto the bar, and it has a very linear, very even load all the way from bottom to top. Obviously, straight weight's going to be harder at the bottom, but it's going to ease off at the top, okay? So if you have someone who's playing soccer or a different sport and they're running up, like say a soccer player runs up to head a ball and they land, if they have a shallow bend in the knee and they go to change direction, bands work perfect for that. If they have a moderate bend in the knee, chains work perfect for that. If they jump up and they get into a deeper squat position, straight weight works perfect for acceleration from that phase. So for an athlete, we actually need to accelerate all the way through range of motion optimally. And when you have different types of loads coming on through different areas, our body, our nervous system learns how to optimally accelerate through different types of resistance. Football players, if you're a running back, there's different weights and different speed guys. You have a guy that's defending you who's a little faster than the guy the week before. The week before, the guy was slower, but he was bigger, heavier, stronger. The next guy's not as strong, not as heavy, but he's faster. We have these different speeds and different things to deal with. So it is important for us to have it. You look at CrossFit, who knows what implement we're going to get? We have to work. What's the diameter of that sandbag? What's the diameter of that stone? What's the weight of it? We're going up an incline, or we're going flat, or we're going down declines. Like, do we have an apparatus we've never used before? We have all these different things, and depending on your height and the apparatus you use, it's going to come out in different areas. So it's extremely important for us to use different types of accommodating resistance, but also still use straight weight, because we have to optimize every inch of range of motion that we're going to do as an athlete.
Yeah, and I think accommodating resistance offers that opportunity too for someone who's been training CrossFit for a long time. It's really common for them to actually be really fantastic at all of the things, or at a high level, and now they're fighting for these like very tiny percentages because they've fallen kind of victim to exactly what CrossFit talks about as a premise, that constantly varied functional movement, high intensity. Well, that constantly varied, when you've done it for so many years, CrossFit, and you're doing it in huge volume like a games athlete might. I mean, are you still getting the same stimulus doing wall ball, doing these lifts as you were 2 years ago, 5 years ago? Or now are you past a point of diminishing return where you put in these sessions, the weight has to be so heavy for it to give you a decent stimulus, and you're just getting very, very little return on it, versus introducing a brand new stimulus and saying like, here, try this, develop this, use a specialty bar. Like, here's this opportunity to get better in a brand new and different way, and maybe, move that needle 5% instead of having to kill yourself to move that needle 1%.
I would say one of the first things I see with competitive CrossFitters when we move them into the conjugate system is how much better their joints feel. Because think about how much they're below parallel in workouts, WODs. And then you do the same thing with straight weight, like versus you got accommodating resistance, you unload that bottom position. But most people don't get stuck in the bottom anyway. They get that bounce, and it's the middle that really starts to bog them down. And when you got that band driving against you, it just starts to train that nervous system to finish. So you're saving a lot of wear and tear in your joints. You're still training those neuromuscular adaptations that are going to help you in your WODs. Jesse, you and I talked about this a little bit, and I would love to get a video up, but, obviously some bias here. And this is, watching Ricky Garrard next to Justin Medeiros in the wall balls is like the first one. You're sitting there watching, you're like, oh my goodness, like Medeiros was it 12 foot?
Yeah.
So you got way more negative. So you got a 9.8 meters per second times the weight of the ball that's driving you down, and Medeiros just popping up, and he's much shorter than Ricky, and his speed was off the charts better. And you're watching first round, Ricky's like, you can tell it's all his muscular system that's controlling it. His quads are controlling the descent. His quads are controlling the concentric, where, Medeiros is using that elasticity out of the bottom. You could see, and not only did he have the elasticity out of the single arm snatch as well, where you watched Garrard really at that first one, he was kind of hanging around with Medeiros, and him and Roman, they were all kind of tight. Second interval got worse. Third interval wasn't even in the top 10 because those muscles are just getting fatigued out. Furthermore, you take one of the best speed strength athletes in CrossFit, that Guy, that dude who won that event, like you watch him, same thing. Like that guy's got tremendous elasticity, and he still moves super clean. Like just because you're using the bounce doesn't mean you get to not think about great technique. Like that's one of the great things that the bands and doing dynamic effort is going to do for you. You're going to train yourself to use that bounce in a good manner where you're not putting wear and tear on the joints, just using the elasticity of those tendons and ligaments instead.
100%. That's like we talk about, you have to introduce 15% or more new exercises to an athlete each year to learn new movement at the fastest rate possible. Mm-hmm. It gets very hard to do when you're talking about an athlete like Justin, right? And so like these different speeds and different things can be just that trick. But even something simple like you could take a band, put it around each foot, cross it around your neck so it crosses on each shoulder, do 100 wall balls for time.
Ugh.
Yeah, I've actually. Have you tried? Have you box squatted wall balls? Box
yes.
squat?
And I've had
That
athletes
is
who have issues,
ragged.
and we do box squat wall balls too.
Yeah, box, like if you had a box to wall ball where it's not a, and this is real important, is this is not a bottom position, like touch, react against the box and rebound. This is a down, full stop on the box, and then driving out of the bottom. And you try 100 wall balls like that, it is an entirely different game. That 10-foot line is a lot further away.
Yeah, just so people know, the box squat is designed to break that eccentric concentric cycle. Like your legs rest, so it'd be the same thing. You're not bouncing off. So sometimes, like in CrossFit, we use the medicine ball for depth, where people can kind of hit it and stand. That's not what we're talking about in a box squat. In the box squat, it is a sit, the legs relax, the trunk stays static, and you drive out of the. So just to kind of clarify that.
Yeah, Jesse had asked me if I did box squats for a wall ball, right? And I said yes. And the reason why I did is one of my athletes that came to the gym had some knee issues when they first started my gym. So 90% of soft tissue injuries happen during the reversal phase of the lift, and that breaks up the eccentric and phase. It breaks up the reversal phase of the lift. So I could keep the athlete at parallel. They wouldn't go too deep. We broke up that phase, and it allowed them to do workouts with class. They could not have done wall balls, a regular wall ball. Their knees were not capable of it. So it allowed them to do the same workout with class, be a part of class, work on some attributes they need to help them get past, and then by the time we got their knees functioning correctly, they would still have they would already have the conditioning to do the workouts at regular speeds and be able to hang.
Oh man, the box squat as a prescription for knee issues in CrossFit is amazing. Like we use it all the time.
A lot of things.
It's just that like you apply it. Yeah, wall ball, any of the box, any of the squatting positions. If you have athletes having a hard time, I had that actually problem when I was still doing Wildland Fire, where I really bothered my my patellar tendon doing Calzoo. That 100 thrusters with 5 burpees on the minute.
Oh yeah.
And it got really sensitive for it. It was quite a issue for a bunch of months, but I was able to box squat and I was able to manage that position because it, depending on the width you use, the wider you go, you can really take that pressure off that patellar tendon. You develop a unique and special strength. So, it's not like that athlete who is being, condemned to the box for their movements in a Metcon. When they get out of that and can come back to that class, like, oh man, wall balls have never felt so easy. Push press never felt so easy. That dip drive, because the other side with the bands is, thinking about like, well, you're not building that. If you don't feel like you're building enough strength out of the hole, you're like, see the bigger picture of understanding that top end strength in what sport other than powerlifting and CrossFit, and weightlifting, are you dealing with that real heavy strength in the bottom position? It's very few. We work that for range and strength and joint health, but inside of actual like field sports, court sports, that sort of stuff, predominantly the joint angle ranges of the hips, knees, ankles are generally pretty minor. And that top end of that squat is actually where most of the work is being done. Not to say that we want to start, partial squat reps and those sort of pieces, but where those bands pick up, that's where that work's being done. And just like Shane said with the chains, man, if you have an athlete who gets stuck in the hole on their clean or their snatch, just coming out of that, chains is a game changer because they do hit hard and sharp. And you can also adjust the height for them to time to hit right where that spot is weak and use that for development as just something else to add to the list of tools a coach can use to apply to athletes with problems.
So, there's 3 things to me when it comes to speed. We always hear athletes who talk about speed creating, like for Olympic lifting, right, is extremely important. There are 3 major things that you can do to affect someone's speed. One is static overcome by dynamic. Okay, so think about starting the starting blocks and accelerating out. You have no stored kinetic energy. Okay, so you have to violently contract the tissue to create your speed. All right, so that's like, like I said, 100 meter sprint coming out of blocks. That's a box squat. You pause in the box, you accelerate up. So you're getting the tissue to contract at a fast rate of speed. A second factor for speed is the ability to store greater amounts of stored kinetic energy, which, studies we've done with Ohio State has proven that the West Side method using accommodating resistance, especially band tension, has the ability to store kinetic energy faster and higher than anybody. The studies we've done with our athletes, we store kinetic energy at a much higher rate than anybody else in the world. Now, why that is because the bands pull you down at a faster rate of speed. You have a faster reversal speed, and that actually trains your tendons. So we train every time we do band tension to the bottom, we are training our tendons to store greater amounts of kinetic energy. So that's a second way to get substantially faster. Then the third way is that we accelerate all the way through range of motion because we have the accommodating resistance to offset, the human strength curve. Okay. So we have these three major factors that allow us to accelerate and be faster than everybody else, where other people aren't utilizing these things. To give you an idea, we've all seen the person get in a front squat. They come down, they can't stand back up, and they bounce a couple of times, they stand up. Did they get stronger in those 2-3 bounces? No. They stored a greater amount of kinetic energy in their tissue. When they got that rebound effect, that rubber band effect, they got a little bit higher and got into a better leverage where their muscles were finally strong enough to stand up all the way. Okay? So when you understand the attributes that you're looking at an athlete, you can start to see what's more important for that athlete. But those are the three key things to accelerating as fast as possible. And we train this stuff every week.
Yeah. I think the other piece too, when you sort of, bringing up Olympic lifting and those sort of pieces, like I love Olympic lifting. I love the sport. There's great work being done out there, but you've also got, especially for dynamic development, like when I'm dealing with our sport athletes, so the athletes I work kind of one-on-one with, who their competitive sport is not Olympic weightlifting and it's not CrossFit, is we actually don't do any weightlifting. So we don't use snatch, clean and jerk at all. And the reason is I only get X amount of hours every week with that athlete. And the time it takes to develop snatch and clean and jerk to where they have the reward and the value of them is starting to pay off in physiological response. So how much force you're creating, how much explosive power you're creating, it can be a long road, especially if the athlete lacks that range of motion. Like if they can't front rack, if that overhead position is delicate, the exposure in those lifts inside of that learning process is also higher. So you get an athlete who's competing for MMA or those sort of pieces, like they're already putting a ton of work into those shoulders. Sometimes the opportunity to be able to train explosive power without having to put a ton of pressure, extra work on those shoulders can really be a big benefit. So rather than we're going to keep it simple, do hang power cleans, rather than spending our time working that skill set, trying to use that pattern to develop force, we back squat, we box squat, we apply bands and chains, we do 12 sets of 2 on the minute. So, in the course of a training session, if we do 12 sets of 2 on the minute, we are all in, all done by the 12-minute mark. We've done 24 reps with, 50 to 60% of steel, plus that 25 pounds of band, or 25% of bands or chains. When you talk about volume of work being moved and the time that it's being moved at, plus applying that rep 1 to sort of like track a velocity, we're getting a ton of tangible data that you can take to the rest of the coaching team and say, hey, here's what we're doing. Like we're minimizing this athlete's exposure and risk of injury by keeping the pattern simple. We're minimizing their training time for how much is spent on skills development by using a pattern like box or back squat, which not to say that those are simple patterns themselves, but they're certainly much quicker to develop both by ask of range of motion and skill set relative to clean or snatch. And then we're maximizing this force production because we're applying enough tension to the system. The athlete can accelerate optimally inside of that range of motion. So for example, if we took something like less bias, like a box squat, is when we're looking to develop, if a coaching team wants to show a metric of show me how high this athlete can box jump, here's where they're at, or here's where their vertical jump is at. You're like, great. Like we will train jumping as well, but we will predominantly be developing the squat, the back, we'll predominantly be developing the box jump using speed squats and speed pulls. And we have been extremely successful with that with our athletes. I always come back to Tegan. She's definitely our most successful jumper. I think she's 5'8", 145 pounds, 48.5-inch standing box jump at 18 years old with 0 time spent Olympic lifting. 0 injuries from training over the course of all of our training over the past 4 or 5 years and 10 plus years at the gym. She started with us on our teen side as a kid, right? And that to me is just like, that's just so easy. That's just such an easy sell to the rest of the coaching staff, knowing that that strength conditioning coach is putting max effort into the athletes' like health, safety, and then also data points. So we are accountable to the rest of the team for what we're producing as a result.
You know, and if you look at, Ryan Moody, right? He's broken a lot of world records in jumping. This is the system he used. He visited Westside, visited my gym. Louis helped him. I helped him. He learned the system. He promotes the system. And it's, it's one of those things like all the best jumpers out there I see this is what they're doing. This is how you create that kind of velocity at the right speed and the right time, in the right positions, is understanding how to put together.
All of our best jumpers in the gym are conjugate lifters. That's produced the highest jumps in the gym for on the men's and women's side.
So was there anything else that you guys want to cover on the squat before we go to the
I think so. Just to rehash, like, I guess, just as a rehash quickly, if you're thinking about trying this, we would do it 72 hours before we max out. So generally for us, we do the dynamic lower on Friday and the max lower on Monday. The best way to do it is if you get a straight weight, like if you're going to use a straight bar or whatever bar you want to use, get a 1 rep max, establish that number on like the prior Monday. And then when you get to that Friday, use that to calculate your percentages. The percentages you would use are going to be 50, 55, and 60% for steel weight. So if you're, like Chris said, if you're a 400-pound squatter, you're going to start with 200 pounds on the barbell and including the barbell. And then you're going to apply 25% of band tension to that. So you'll need 100 pounds total of band, which in general for most people is a number 3 band from Rogue or a light band from Westside. And as a big point is do not get hung up on the percentages. If you load 50% and you're moving slow AF, then make that adjustment. Do not go up 5% and move even slower and then move even slower in week 3. Make the changes required and put full effort in. The time you're done those speed squats, even for a great athlete, you should feel like you've really done some work. Apply that sort of like CrossFit and sport mentality to this piece. Do not treat it like a accessory movement or slow and easy. Be in it and work as hard as you possibly can. I mean, that's I think the big pieces coming off. Like if you're going to start with squat.
Yeah, be an athlete.
Be an athlete. Yeah. I guess it makes sense to move from there to dead, right? So we're going to speed squat and then we're going to move straight into speed pulls.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things you have an opportunity to do with your speed work is you have an opportunity to train your technique. Okay. So we have a lot of variations for our deadlifts on max effort day. In the off season, we'll do speed work on sumo and conventional, but let's use the example of your conventional puller. When it comes to a competitive phase, like 12 weeks out from a competition, those 12 weeks, all our variations are conventional so that we can dial in our technique. And you dial in the technique underneath a sub-maximal load. You're not afraid of that weight. This lets you charge into that weight as fast as possible and execute nice and clean. And what happens is you do more repetitions doing speed work than you do in max work. So your movement quality, your speed, your acceleration will be something that will automatically transfer over to your max work, which will give you a huge advantage in the sport.
Yeah, I would say, when people like, hey, because I of the 3 lifts, deadlift is my best of the 3. It still obviously leaves a lot of room on the table for being substantially better. But when people say, what's your biggest piece for the deadlift? What do you do that's the highest value every week? And 100%. My answer is speed pulls. We do 12 by 1 week in, week out, and switch it every 3 weeks. But that work, like I just find like those reps again, like you said, like I mentioned with the squat, is that's opportunity to get 12 setups. Like 12 times you're going to descend, put your hands on the bar, and pull it as hard as you can. So you get 12 practices at how you want to move with a 1 rep max. And I love that inside of those speed pulls is you can always feel like, oh man, that one was good. And like that one was, I was a little forward on my feet. That one, I didn't accelerate as quickly off the floor. And I would say for all the years I've been doing speed pulls, which is more than 10, I'm not sure that I've had a week where I've got 12 by 1 where I've been like nailed all of them, like it's always like, and then you got that opportunity to rest. So coming off of that pull, then you've got, I like these on the 45 seconds because it is less reps. Than squat. So we'll pull 12 by 1 on the 45 seconds. And you've got that little bit of time to just evaluate the lift, think about it, decide what you want to do different, and now you go again. And you do that every single week, and the cost on the body feels very low for what you get out of that.
Well, like you said, when you're doing max effort, it's so heavy of a strain that sometimes, you can pull, even black out and finish the lift. Like in my gym, we actually set up our position at the top before we start our lift. And we believe the whole reason why we do that, so our nervous system has a finish point. And if you were to black out during the lift, then, you should still be able to finish that lift before
just zombie, still able to move.
Yes, you should just go. Your body goes to reset back to start.
It's all he knows.
I mean, if you don't, exactly, 100%, right? But the thing is, if it's too heavy, you can't do that, right? Like you can't feel like what was off. I don't know, because you're straining so hard, where you're a little, you might feel something if it's way off, but little nuances you won't. But underneath sub-maximal weight, it doesn't strain hard enough. It doesn't hurt bad enough that you can feel those little things, and that's one thing I totally agree with you, Jesse.
Yeah. Yeah.
I bias a lot towards my, especially right now, I've got a lot of 8th, 9th, and 10th graders, and most of them are pretty new to lifting in general. So the dynamic effort day is perfect for me just to constantly be on them about technique. It's like right now, that's all I want. I want you to have the most perfect technique possible, and we'll have a nice big foundation that will load everything else up.
Yeah, I think that's what we talked about on the max day too. Like the same reason we don't bias towards 3 and 5 rep maxes is because that first rep is excellent. The second rep less so, the third rep less so, and then the fourth and fifth can be real ragged. But whereas and the same thing is true on these dynamic effort, this opportunity here with the short rest period between, it's just enough to break it up to be like, okay, be excellent again. And then repeat that on the minute or on the 45 seconds every single time. So it just breaks it up enough, which is again also different than the stimulus of CrossFit, where inside that Metcon, sometimes it's hard to fix things. But with this work rest period is really an opportunity to fix things. With the class, it's so good. I agree with that youth lifting. When I work with CrossFit athletes from at any level, that opportunity, if their deadlift is a mess, we're going to be doing speed pulls every single week and developing it in those speed pulls versus doing anything else.
There's a couple things with the speed work too. One thing that if I have athletes who keep their hips too high in a deadlift, which is extremely common, I will do 9 sets of 3 with them, because then they'll do 2 perfect reps to the first rep being imperfect. They'll have their hips too low in the first one, and the second and third one, the hip stays higher and exactly where it should. So if I have an athlete who doesn't know where to put their hips, that's what I use. If I have an athlete that needs to get perfect pickup and learn how to wedge into that bar and how to accelerate optimally, but their hips are in a great place, that's where those singles come in, So I will adjust my rep scheme or what I use according to what attribute I need to bring out of the athlete. But, if you look at someone who the first rep, their hips are always too low, well, you're getting 2 perfect reps to every one that's bad. You're going to solidify a perfect movement pattern by doing more repetitions in good position. And we're talking about the squats or deadlifts. You have a 30-second minute rest period, depending on what you use. There's plenty of opportunity for a coach to make a little simple correction. And what I love about the speed work, a lot of people don't talk about, let's say we have 12 sets of 2. Every set, I have an opportunity to adjust the technique of the athlete. In every set, if I do see an adjustment that needs to be made, that means the bar speed will actually be faster than the next set. The fastest the bar will move will be in perfect technique. So if I make a technique adjustment, let's say I'm like, I think Chris needs to widen his feet up. Well, if I widen his feet and he goes slower, I might say, I think it might be an optimal position, but he has some lacking muscle groups right now. Or I might say, that didn't look the way I thought. His leverages are actually a little bit better with his feet closer together. But he will know, he will feel if his bar speed picks up. And then it's like, see that, Chris? See how your bar speed is up? Yes. That's where I want your feet at. And now the juice is worth the squeeze. He recognizes it, he feels the speed, and it means something to him. And when something means something to an athlete, they are all in. They're bought in, and they attack it, right? And the harder they attack it, the more it'll solidify the perfect movement, and the more they'll solidify that violent acceleration. But you think in 12 sets of 2, that's 12 times in between those sets, you have an opportunity to just adjust and fine-tune that technique every time. It's not a heavy enough weight to scare somebody to where they're not listening to what you have to say. It's light enough that they can make those adjustments.
Yeah, or time and load driven. So it's not only is it not that stress of how what they're trying to accomplish. Like the I guess what I mean is like inside of a Metcon or inside of a Max, you might give feedback that could be valuable, but the athlete's buy-in might be lower in that moment because they're like, I don't want to make a change right now in the thick of this. I want the result. But on that speed day and those speed sets, you're like, yeah, sure. Like, yeah, I'll move out half inch. I'll, turn my toes out, 10 degrees. Sure. Give it a try. And then they can see that and test it. Be like, actually that, yeah, it really did feel a lot better. I also like what you said about the doubles and triples. I've definitely used that with newer athletes with high hips because we've talked about that before. It is good. Yeah, you get that athlete who always has the high hips or settles into a good position on their second and third. It is a good way initially to make that little change where like, hey, just not getting it. Like feel where you set your hips on your second and third rep and then trying to emulate that on the first rep in subsequent sets. That can actually be a good fix for that.
One of the things I love you guys are talking about right now is that programming is obviously critical and having systems and having direct plans of what you want to implement on your athlete. But you guys are also taking it to that next level. It's like there's always watching technique because even as guys get better and gals get better in some movements are going to start to suffer in other ways. So you're constantly evaluating your athletes and seeing, especially in things like, there's some, I mean, I can't speak to powerlifting because I don't, have any competitive athletes in that side, but, with CrossFit, the volume can just become overwhelming where you can start to see some of these imbalances start to really take place at certain times of their career. So being constantly assessing movement is something, that's a vital importance for the trainer.
I'd say similar to a jump too, is that the speed work, squats and deads can also give you a heads up or a early warning for an athlete who's starting to break down a little bit. It's definitely it's always a balance with Justin as we get close to the games. You're just trying to monitor all systems to make sure, like, are we getting the most out of this athlete we possibly can, but also being cognizant of not pushing them over the edge, 4 weeks before.
You're riding the line.
It's a delicate line. And you see it like, especially you throw a velocity meter on there and an athlete who's producing, 0.8 to 1.0 week in, week out. And suddenly, they're 0.6, 0.6, 0.6, 0.7. You're like, all right. And it's just you might not make initially a change, but at least maybe it starts a conversation. Like, how else are you feeling? Like, how's your sleep been? Like, where's your food at right now? Like, it might just start the initial phase of asking more questions that might tip you off earlier for, hey, this athlete is getting close to the limit.
Chris made a good point. I'll take the most successful powerlifter I've trained. They broke 43 all-time world records, okay? There wasn't 1 week during that run that I did not make a suggestion on technique. And it's minute. At that level, it's very minute. But it's still an adjustment, constant adjustment. We only have 3 lifts in powerlifting: squat, bench,
There's
deadlift.
nowhere to hide.
That is it. And when you have someone who has broken world records at a higher rate than maybe potentially anybody in history, there's one other person that maybe is right there, but 43 world records, and every week during that whole time there was adjustments in technique. Mm-hmm. Now we're looking at CrossFit that has substantially a lot more than 3 movements. It's not hard to think that you have to have a constant eye. There is no way anybody is going to win the games without having a coach consistently watching to make adjustments for them. They're racehorses. They have to worry about the output. They have to learn as much as they can, but they're not coaches. They have to have someone watch them from the outside and notice little tiny nuances. The better they get, the smaller those deviations are, the better the coach has to be. But like I said, when we are noticing improvements and adjustments every single week on the best powerlifters of all time, when they only have 3 movements to do, it's even more important for CrossFit athletes with the variety that they have available.
Yeah, 100% for the eyes on. One of the main reasons I agreed to work with Justin was if we could do the sessions on Zoom or FaceTime, because I was actually unwilling to do it at all if it was just going to be draw up programming and send it. It's just too big of a piece to the success really starts to dwindle versus having 6 hours a week at least every week watching that athlete move. You're like, oh man, because you might notice it on anything. Like a change could be how they sit. If they go to set up on the incline bench, how they sit down and like bump the dumbbells to the shoulders. They might be like, oh, like that's not usual. And like, hey, you turn around, like show me like your shoulder range overhead. And you're like, oh, okay, there's something different there. And it's given that direction. Like, this system is built for constant athlete assessment, even when you're not expecting it. Like, if you're just watching athletes move through this, you're going to pick up things or see things that may not show up other places until, worst case scenario, it's too late. Or where you think they might. Like, you just might have stuff you're like, oh man, I wouldn't have guessed, but that's clearly different than usual. We picked up a piece with Tegan after she placed second at Worlds a couple of years ago for BMX. Was in France or she was in Europe for BMX, and then had a couple extra weeks there. Came back, our first session back, like clearly like was not moving her normal self. And I think just a combination of like all the travel time, the time in the plane, etc. And you can just see that through the, movements, because you're always eyes on. So, when you work with athletes one-on-one all the time, when something minor changes them, you pick it up immediately. And that's the dream, is being able to make those corrections before they really hit you in the face.
You pick it up immediately if you're looking for it. I think that's a big caveat. Like, you've got to be, watching these movements intently.
But what better than a system that makes you watch them?
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing we're talking about today is like we do speed squats, speed pulls, right? Just for lower body, whether you're doing speed work, for upper or lower. But why do we do our maxes? Why do we do our speed work? We have attributes we're trying to build, but then at the end of that speed work, we choose our special exercises depending on what faults we've seen and what we need to work on, fix, and improve to maintain position better, or to attain position better, or to be stronger, or to accelerate through ranges where we're lacking, right? So our special exercises are picked on the faults that we see in our movement. Whether there's a weak position or a spot that we slow down in during the speed work, or there's a breakdown in our body, like our knees cave in or our chest drops or whatever that is, we choose our special exercises accordingly. So what's nice about the system is on max day, you hit a max. From our max, we choose special exercises according to what our faults are during that max. On our speed work, same thing. So this actually trains a coach to look for faults, because otherwise you're just blindly shooting in the dark, looking for your special exercises. That does not make you a good coach. If you want to be an excellent coach, you need to find the special exercises that have the biggest reward and payoff for the problem that you see. And so what I love about it is, as an athlete, you're moving and you start looking for that, because you start noticing that the coach does that. Coach, coaches you through your movement when you're doing speed work, tries to coach out of you any faults. And then by the time you're done with the 12 sets of 2, on squats, or 12 sets of 1 on deadlifts, you now know what they've cleaned up. They know what they've cleaned up. They know what they couldn't clean up. And what they couldn't clean up will be addressed through our accessory movements. So it does set up new coaches to learn to constantly look for fault. It also, when an athlete's been doing this long enough, they'll start getting the mindset of constantly looking at what did I do well, what didn't I do well.
Yeah, so that self-assessment piece is as big, right?
Well, and I think that's, and this is probably another podcast because we can go down a huge rabbit hole here, but, accessory work's one of those kind of like token terms inside the community right now where people are adding an accessory, but a couple major, pitfalls are, first, it's not being done heavy enough. It's, just done kind of lightly just to get through it. And it's not done for specifics. Like, accessory work's not just there just to fill time. The accessory work or the special exercises are there to work on weaknesses. Like, do you have leverage weaknesses? Do you just have, joints that have been injured? Like, what's your breakdown? Like, what's causing you to lift heavier? And you prescribe it that way. Whereas, a lot of it right now, I just see people do accessory and it's just going through the motions. It's not really done with intent.
So deadlift, before we move on to press, is that deadlift setup, 12 by 1 is a great way to go. Same thing with the 3-week waves, starting at 40% of steel and then adding 30% of bands or chain. Again, like I said, we'll try to get a video up for how we sort of like apply those resistances to the bar. What I would say for us is we will start week 1 at 40%. And then what I'll say for our pullers is increase in weight if you can maintain speed. So if they can stay fast but add a percentage, then they just add a reasonable percentage, or not. I actually have found a ton of success by not having to stress that much about varying the weight. Just as matters just getting the work in and focusing on the quality of the movement, position and speed. So most of the time for me personally, I'll actually go by how it feels that day. So I know I'm working about 40%. I'll set that up, but I know as I get there, if I'm just like, man, today is just feeling slow on that bar, or I hook up the rep 1 and that result is just showing a slower speed, I have a tendency to just be like, I'm just not going to load 2 there today. Or you load to that 40%, it's your second week, like, oh man, smoking it, pushing 1.0s. Then like, okay, I'm going to add 2-3%, see how that goes, push that up. Like, I'm still like 0.95 meters a second. Sweet. I'm working here for week 2. And other than working on the 45 seconds, I really like that on the 45. 1 minute's a little slow for that. I don't know, if you give it as a try, you drop those on those down from 1 minute to 45 seconds to 30 seconds. 30 seconds is a life-changing experience if you get it right.
It's cooking, man. It's fast.
What would you say, Shane, for your take on that then? Like, if you're going 12 by 1s, what are you going to do for load over the course of those 3 weeks?
I'm going to do 40% bar weight, 30% band. That's, we can increase it. It just depends. Yeah. I'm more worried about speed than anything else. Some people increase it. Some people stay the same on it. Really, technique and velocity that's it.
Yeah.
And if someone can carry that speed for 3 weeks, we will do that. If they can't, we'll keep it the same. It's all about the speed to us. What you'll notice is high-level lifters do better at increasing the weight than lower-level lifters do or beginners do. So, when someone's newer, I don't really increase either. When someone's been at it a while and they're really efficient at it, then yes, I'll do the 5%. I'll potentially increase that. But usually on pulls, we're not increasing. It's usually just squats.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So, Chris, anything to add before we switch to bench?
No, I mean, just keep it simple, especially in the beginning. Like, this stuff will work really well, just like you with Justin. This will work really well for a long time. Just sticking to the prescriptions, just kind of the same pitfalls you talked about. Don't get bogged down with weights. Get, focused on speed.
One thing I want to point out, it's really interesting and awesome, actually. So Jesse's helped with Justin for, to the games, right? And Jesse just started talking about, we're going to start adding chains because we've only used bands with them. That Jesse can help build a games champion, and he's still holding back techniques and adjustments that can be made because at the time it wasn't needed and he wasn't ready for them yet. Even the fittest man in the world wasn't quite ready for them yet. And this is how powerful the system is that literally there is always an answer. There's always an adjustment. There's always something there. Now, don't get me wrong. If we're looking at Justin's won the game 7 times, we're looking for an 8th one, Jesse's probably going to have to get pretty creative by that, right?
Yeah.
But it's still pretty new stimulus, and there's still a lot of stuff that Jesse's normally does with people that he probably haven't even tapped into.
Yeah, we work those pieces as hard as we possibly can before we move or add on too much extra. Constantly varied for sure, but also keeping in mind that, if you constantly vary things too much, it's just, and I think the same is true for CrossFit, right? Like if we end up in a spot where, we have too much variation from, too much, there's not enough room to make that change and adaptation. So I think, it's making sure that we have enough variation to continue to force a stimulus change, but not so much variation that we're not able to, kind of move forward. And that's where that, 3-week wave is kind of nice, is that week 1 sets the tone. Week 2 is spicy, and you've made adjustments based off of week 1. And week 3 is that last chance, like, hey, this is our last week before we make a switch. Full effort, everything you got, and then we're going to change it. Okay, bench press. Shane, do you want to talk through the base prescription?
Sure. So, I kind of want to, if we're dealing with powerlifting, we'd say bench press. If we're dealing with CrossFit athletes, I like to say we're working on pressing. Okay. And, with this, it's interesting is when I first started going to Westside Barbell and I first started doing the system, we actually did a 3-week pendulum wave in our bench press. Okay. And so we would wave up percentages, 5% a week for over 3 weeks, just like we would in the squat. Now, at the time, we took half the gym and we did the same type of speed work we've always done, the 3-week wave, and we took the other half of the gym and we changed the movement every week instead of every 4th week, okay? And then we didn't wave it. We just went either 70% bar weight or 40% bar weight, 30% accommodating resistance, okay? Once we did a full cycle of getting ready for like 12 weeks of this, getting ready for a competition, we went to the competition and everybody had the same increase on bench. Neither side had an advantage over the other one. Neither side had a disadvantage. From that point, we changed, and we actually switched it to changing the movement every week. And so some people would say, well, why? You didn't notice an improvement. Why would you make a change? Pretty simple. We look, Westside Barbell looked for advantage anywhere it could get it, whether it was conditioning, strength, speed, technique. Anywhere we could, if it's not your advantage, it's your disadvantage. Okay, so we're constantly trying to find the place to make an improvement. So, talking to the athletes on both sides, would you just like about changing every week? Would you just like about how we always do it and we have a 3-week wave? Louis had a thought that the upper body wouldn't affect the nervous system as much as the lower body did, that maybe we only had to wave the lower body. He was correct on that. So we made the change on one simple thing. The athletes enjoyed changing it every week more, and they had it was more fun for them, and it didn't get as monotonous as boring for them. Now it's funny because you hear Westside Barbell, and it's probably the most hardcore gym in the history of powerlifting. That you hear stories of fights breaking out and how vicious it could be there.
There's more to stories. There's just video. In the background of some of those videos, those cameras get knocked over with guys fighting in the background.
Police records.
And then the really bad fights, the videos were destroyed before anybody could get the evidence. But so, those things happen, but, it happened because of the intensity and everybody was putting 100% on the line, right? And in that, even at that place, enjoying your training is a part of success.
Yeah.
Okay. So we changed every week. Now it benefited down the road because down the road, changing our speed work every week was very advantageous for me to work with strongman competitors and to work with CrossFitters. And I'll explain why here in a minute. So traditionally, we do 9 sets of 3 on speed work. We'll do 3 sets of 3 reps close grip. We go 3 sets of 3 reps medium grip, and then we go 3 sets of 3 wide grip, or what a powerlifter would call a competitive grip.
And I think to be clear on that too is that that is a specific location on the bar, not relative to the athlete. So when Shane says close grip, he's talking about 4 fingers right on the inside edge of the knurl. When he says medium grip, he's talking about your hands centered between the inside edge of the knurl and the power ring, which is the inner ring of the two if you've got a double ring on the bar. And then wide grip is pinky on that power ring. And, whether you're 5'6" or 6'5", that when we say close, medium, wide on that bar, those are the positions on the bar that he would be taking.
Correct. So we do 30-second rest periods. Again, this is a day we can work on technique on bench. We will use every type of bar you can imagine. So for speed work, we'll do, let's say you don't have accommodating resistance. You're going to use your 70% or maybe 5% less because you're new to this. We will do floor press for speed work. We'll do a bench press for speed work. We can do dead presses for speed work. And we can also do, we'll do ballistic benching, which is something that only high-level people with good shoulders should do. And that's when the bar comes down, you let it release as fast as you can. And then before it touches your chest, like an inch off the chest, you reverse it before it has a chance to touch your chest. Most people should not do this, but it is some variation that we would do. Then you obviously have bands to the bottom, chain, reverse band available to you as well. And we can do that on floor press as well. Okay, so we have a lot of variations available between the dead press variations, the ballistic benching, straight weight, accommodating resistance. There's a lot of variation there that we have available. Also, what I like to do with my CrossFit athletes, and Jesse and Chris can come in on this one, is every 4th week I like to go overhead. I had good success before I started working with CrossFitters with strongman competitors who wanted to race their overhead. And what I would do is I would use bench press to increase their overhead. Because with a bench, you have back support. Because of the back support, you can push more weight. You can strain with heavier weight for longer periods of time. So that as long as your shoulder mobility is there, which if it's not, this is your fault. No one told you to let that mobility go. It's something you should constantly work on and make sure you always have full function of your joint. So if we do this, what will happen is the bench press will actually raise our overhead. If you looked at like the Russian Dynamo Club, if you're a 242-pound weightlifter, they wanted you to have a minimum 405-pound close grip bench. How many Olympic lifters who weigh that have that kind of a close grip bench or higher?
I think the bench is.
I
think the bench is a massive tool that does not get utilized till its full capacity for CrossFitters. I think CrossFitters spend a ton of their time in a very specific grip width, no matter what bar they're using, and a very specific either pulling hands down or pulling hands overhead. But that pull and push that's horizontal is super limited. And I think what it does is it leaves a lot on the table for when you're looking at accessory movements of, let's get some flat bench, like horizontal row, where you might set a bench up that straddles the bar in the rack and then pull till it touches the underside of the bench. Like, man, that gets most CrossFitters real quick because they are just not used to that angle of pull. I would say like secondary to that, and on the same thread, is the same is true for bench press. Is all that time spent with their hands over the head pressing barbells or pulling on the pull-up bar, it leaves a lot. It leaves a lot of options for how we're developing the body for just being able to like, hey, let's see what happens when we change that stimulus to horizontal push. And we've had a ton of success with athletes who, for whatever reason, need a break from working overhead for a while as CrossFit athletes. And we put a ton of effort into bench press and they come back and, put, 20, 30 pounds on their jerk.
One thing that I was always like, at a good bench press, a couple things I'd always be good at was push-ups. I was really fast at push-ups. I could do a lot of reps on push-ups and dips, which are, two things that show up in CrossFit, because you have the tricep strength that you get. But if you look at power lifters who do not lose overhead mobility are massive overhead pressers. You look at another group of people who are massive overhead pressers, and that's shot putters. Shot putters are great at overhead, and they're also the second best benchers in the world. Next to bench press specialists, your shot putters have phenomenal bench presses, okay? But they have phenomenal overhead too because they retain the shoulder mobility to do it. So, we look at like Olympic lifting or overhead presses. They move very slowly. To increase your overhead doesn't happen every week. It's not like a squat or a bench. It does not move as fast.
Small movers,
So
short
trying
distance.
to move it. Correct. So, we don't do it every week because if we did it every week, 3 out of 4 weeks, we're going to not get a PR. We're going to get frustrated. But we do this every 4th week, maximally and dynamic for my athletes, because we can hit a PR every 4th week. Okay. But we can't hit it more frequently than that. So when I look at CrossFit, how often do we go overhead in CrossFit? Most gyms you go to, we go overhead all the time. Yes, it's very hard to avoid going overhead in CrossFit. We have to pay close attention to it. So when I started working with CrossFitters and doing speed work and max work, I didn't want to give them 4 days a week of overhead work. So I'm like, well, let's increase this attribute. Let's get them good at bench. They're not going to do it often in competition. It shows up once in a while, and they'll get better at it. Great. It'll help their dips. It'll help their push-ups, and it'll help their overhead. And that is the goal. That's why I said we're going to talk about speed work. We're going to talk about pressing. It's not just bench press. And don't look at it like we're just trying to teach you to bench press. We're trying to increase capacities in you for any type of pressing movement. Okay?
Yeah, and a conjugate system, again, especially with CrossFit, just a massive amount of repetitions you can get week in, week out. Like you want to avoid pattern overload and to have the ability to still develop capacity in a different movement pattern. Like, it's a win-win.
I think inside of programming, I always definitely, as I complete the following week of programming for CrossFit, one of the things I scan for is hands overhead. So just how many days athletes put their hands overhead, and optimally in a week, if we can have 2 days where the athletes don't have their hands over the head, that's kind of the standard for us for week to week.
And I want you guys out there who are CrossFit coaches, pay attention. 2 days a week sounds like it'd be easy to do, but if you really go back and look through your programming for the last year and see how many weeks you got 2 days and you didn't go overhead, okay? So, it's not an easy thing to program. correctly and keep people safe. But, these are some of the things that we pay attention to, and Jesse brings up great points about it. So, when we're doing our speed bench, it's also bars that we use. We use football bars, axle bars, straight bars, bow bars, any kind of bar variation that we have available. When we talk about overhead, any grip that we would utilize in strongman or in Olympic lifting are available to us. So like if you do a log press, you're going to have a neutral grip, right? So for us, if I'm doing speed work for overhead, I only do strict variations or push press variations. I'm not saying you can't do jerks. If you do jerks for timing and it helps you get your timing down, great. But what we're trying to do is increase your force rate production, how fast you can get up to maximal force production, right? This will make you substantially more athletic. So when you're dropping underneath the weight, that's not increasing your force rate production, okay? So strict press, push presses are what we utilize. We'll use a straight bar, we'll use an axle bar, we'll use a log bar. We will do off of pins to overhead, so like a dead press. We'll do it regular off of, front rack position or, behind the neck. We use, band tension, chain weight or straight weight for this as well.
Yeah, I think that, my recommendation would be if you're thinking about buying a specialty bar for pressing is I would recommend that multi-grip, that base level, like Rogue multi-grip with the neutral handles. Like Angle Multi is great and worth adding down the road. But if you have one specialty bar for upper, it's a multi-grip. If you have one specialty bar for lower, it's definitely a safety squat. Because for sure with us, I can speak to countless cases where we've developed a ton of capacity with athletes of all levels by just working that multi-grip bar into programming for horizontal press. But it can be used for all kinds of things. Like I said, like that multi-grip bar can be, chest supported row just by laying flat on a bench, pulling from the bar to underneath the bench. We actually did bent row with it yesterday, which is terrible. But we did multi-grip rows the other day for 4 sets of 10, increasing away. It was super unpleasant. But lots of room for adaptation. And just like with lower, like, the more change, the better. And actually the one thing to set up is knowing that to set up bands it's probably the single easiest thing to set up for anybody, including in a CrossFit class, is for fellas, for us, we basically say number one bands kind of across the board, unless your bench is under 200. So if your bench press is under 200, we go the Rogue 0 bands. And if your bench is over 200, we go to number one bands. And we don't have any athletes that use any heavier bands than number ones. But when we check the weights, the way that we set it up in the Rogue R3 rack or on our competition bench, we have the exact same band tension by putting a heavy dumbbell on the floor and looping the bands under that dumbbell and attaching the bar. We got the exact same, and it feels the same. So if you're looking at, give that pressing a try in a CrossFit class, if you can put a couple of heavy dumbbells down, loop the band underneath, attach them to the bar, that's going to give you a real honest feel for what that's about. And it's just a great piece for something different. People get pretty excited about it, either as a max or as dynamic effort. Putting that into a class, partner people up so you don't need a ton of bands.
Yeah, partner them up.
Yep.
Yeah, put them in triples. Yep.
And then percentage-wise, what are you guys doing for steel on the press?
Steel 70%. If we're doing accommodating resistance, it's 40% bar, 30% accommodating resistance.
Yeah, so 70. So if you're going straight weight, 70%. If you're going accommodating resistance, the number one or number 0 bands. Do you guys do the same thing with that? Are you guys using ones and zeros only?
Yeah, a one band will take you up to a 500-pound bench.
That's why we don't have anyone that goes heavier.
Yeah, right. So, I have people who do more than that, but what I'm telling you is you literally don't have to use above a 1 until you get above 500 pounds. If you get between a 450 and 500 pound bench, you can go up to the next band, probably get away with it, and depending on your speed, how much you move bar. But I know for a fact that you don't need anything more than number 1 to get to a 500 pound bench.
And then do you do that under 200 0 band? Is that kind of the same for you guys?
Correct. Yeah, and there's not going to ever be a CrossFitter who benches 500 pounds raw and wins the games at the same time.
Yeah.
So literally every CrossFit class you have, 0 or 1 band is all you need for that. Okay. Yeah. So don't make it too complicated.
And then, you say 40% steel is what you guys put on the bar? Yeah,
Correct.
sweet. And then switched out every week.
So it used to. Correct. So traditionally, and how the West Side system was set up, is it actually was based off your bench press was actually based off your floor press. So it was actually 50% of your floor press, but most people floor press less than they actually bench press. So we just take 40% of our bench press.
Yeah, actually, it's funny is that's about what we do. We actually do a 2-week wave, only to get that an opportunity. Be like, hey, test this week 1, get feel for it, and we're just a lower level skill set and experience than you guys for sure. So then in week 2, it allows us to be like either the same weight or add a little more, and then have a second go around to see if you can just get a little more performance out of it before we switch. But yeah, we've been doing that for a bunch of years now. Is just 2-week wave, switching it after 2 weeks.
Until you have someone on auto mode, which I mean, like to me, you're a really high level lifter. Actually, that makes a lot of sense. And in all honesty, I have not. There's times I've kept it the same, but I guess it was kind of one of those things that subconsciously I'm like, this person hasn't moved on. I really want them to dial a technique in before I move on. But you're right. In the second week, they're always going to move better. So if you do that as religiously for certain level lifters, 100% think you're right. I actually think it's better than changing every week, just for the simple fact of you're trying to get that athlete. They will always move it better the second week, guaranteed. And you want that movement quality. Once they feel it, it gives them something to search for every week, until they actually get that in all our main movements.
Yeah, it gives them that chance to sort of think about it through the week and be like, hey, when I come back to this next week, let's try to do this better. So moving from there, I guess the last piece is, and we've talked about it kind of in the previous podcast as well, is just being like, past this, it's business as usual. So the idea that on that dynamic lower day, that we're going to do speed squats, 12 sets of 2 in a 3-week wave. We will move into speed pulls, 12 sets of 1, also on a 3-week wave. And then we'll move into accessory work for a handful of things specific to the athlete or the group, and then finish out on midline. And the same is going to be true on that upper, is that we're going to start with speed bench. So we're going to work 9 sets of 3. We'll either do 1 or 2-week wave of that. And then from there, we'll move into our accessory patterns. And then finishing out, we actually don't finish out on midline on our upper days. We do midline on our 2 lower days, and then midline on our 2 accessory days. And on the 2 upper days, for our group, generally we struggle more with the upper. So we stick to more accessory work and volume on the upper. Then we make sure we still get our 4 days a week in for midline. And that's just what we've been up to the last little while.
So see, for powerlifters, I would do midline at the end of every workout, in whether it's oblique or abs. But see, when Jesse's talking about working with CrossFitters, you have to remember that you can still have midline work in your WODs, and you also have WODs to do. So if you're doing toe to bar, knee to elbow, hollow rocks, whatever you're doing, you're going to have that as well. So what you're saying makes complete sense. You'd actually rather have more time and accessories to make the quality and changes that you need to make faster advancements when people are going back to their WODs or and getting their Metcon stuff.
Yeah, I feel like that upper just requires a little more, just a couple more exercises, because the stimulus just doesn't hit home as hard as those lower days. So you can afford, we would do a couple more accessory pieces on an upper day than we would on a lower day, just because of that.
Yeah, we used to finish with high rep banded work on upper days, upper back, middle back, delts.
Yeah, triceps. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because that stuff just pays
100,
off.
200 reps.
Yeah. Anything 100 to 300 reps, minutes. That sometimes it's fun just to go for several minutes. Like, then you don't have to, especially if you're training with a group of people. I love just being like, hey, we're 3, 5, 8 minutes of this unbroken. Then you don't have to worry about counting. You just kind of just go, get the work done. Everyone's having a real fun time, saying things like, isn't this fun?
I love that. I love that. So, we used to do that once in a while. And it's like, okay, you pick a weight, okay, everybody's incline pressing 50 pounds. Max time.
Oh, man, the shame of being the first person to let go of the bands when you're going for time. That's a sad spot to be.
Totally. It doesn't seem normal when you first start doing it either. It's like, wait, I'm supposed to do all these in a row? That's not.
Oh, yeah, man, because you realize very quickly.
That's right.
Similar to CrossFit stuff, like, oh, how bad could 3 minutes get? And you get 1 minute in on try pull downs, and you're like, oh no, like this is a long road ahead. Okay. I think we covered off all the key pieces to what we're sort of looking to get sort of out there initially on podcast 3, talking about dynamic effort method. I guess bringing it back to the very start there, we all have Instagram channels you can follow us on. We have a YouTube channel where we're posting these up as video if you want to see our faces while you listen to us. And we're also getting other content up on that YouTube channel as well, including from episode 1, we actually posted a workout that could be done as an individual or actually implemented into entire class. So if you end up doing that, please reach out to us. We would love to hear some feedback on what you thought of it. We would also love to hear any productive feedback on these podcasts for whatever you've listened to, or if you had things you'd like to hear us talk about or people you think you'd like to have us have on. Other than that, gentlemen, anything to add before we wrap up?
Good.
Okay. Easy. All in, all done.
Conjugate Nation podcast.